the future's ours to write if we learn to read between the lines.
Hi there, Paul Seils here from Between the Lines podcast. Thanks for joining us today. We're joined by Paul Conlon, author of the book Citizen One, The Case Against Digital Identity. Thanks for joining us, Paul.
My pleasure, Paul. Lovely to be here.
So thanks, Paul. Can you share a little bit about your background, which led to you this point in time to be able to create this book?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a senior engineer. I've got an honours degree in electronic engineering and another degree in information technology as well from QUT, both of them. I've had over 20 years working with digital systems, mostly in Australia, but some abroad as well. I've worked in various domains, everything from gaming and wagering to mineral exploration, and I'm an ex-former Australian Army officer as well, where I held a commission in an engineering corps. And so my career has been one of really understanding the human digital interface. I've seen technology deployed for the elimination of human life and also for the preservation of human life. And a good example of that is some of the AI systems, safety systems I've worked on the machine control platforms that I've been involved with, have a high precision control of construction equipment like excavators and bulldozers, these sorts of things. There's a lot of automation around that and a lot of safety around that, obviously, as well. And there are camera systems developed actually within this country that use AI to identify human hazards and obstacles and attempt to alert the operator or cut the machine. And there's all sorts of interesting complexities about identifying what a human is in terms of preserving life and in terms of the other option as well. So I've got a pretty good grasp on how technology is very much a two-sided coin.
There was something interesting as well that Elon Musk was questioned by, in about the middle of 2024, asked who he thought was going to win the US election. He just laughed about it and he said, "You mean which AI is going to win the 2032 election?"
There you go. Yeah, and how would we know?
Yes. It's certainly an accomplishment to become an author. Congratulations and acknowledge you for that. And then particularly at this point in time, given the sensitivity and what we're dealing with in relation to digital identity and the aspects that are associated with it. But for people that perhaps don't even understand or comprehend the concept of what digital identity is or means, how would you define digital identity, given that we already have passports, we have driver's licenses, we have mobile phone numbers that we identify with? How are people defining digital identity?
Yeah, that's actually a very philosophical question. And it's not easy to answer. And I think that is part of the problem we face in terms of education. But broadly, to understand digital ID, you have to understand identity first and who we are and value your identity and understand how identity is linked to resources and our lived experience. So it is hard to define. Digital ID, I guess broadly in the context of what we're going to discuss today, refers to any sort of ecosystem of technical and political products or influences in a society that effectively put digital decisions in front of resource access. So it's a topology where a bureaucratic layer in the society has the ability to make conditional access to everything that you currently enjoy in your life. And I mean that quite literally. It can be just about everything. And it's hard to get your mind around that because people tend to think in terms of, is it an app? Is it a process? Is it a culture? It's actually all of those things. But it's a predatory system that injects itself between you and everything that you love ultimately.
Yes.
The centralised versions of digital ID at least. So I'm quite concerned about the way that, the West in general, the world in general, but particularly this country has adopted it in a blasé type fashion. And I actually find the fact that you asked me to define it quite interesting, given that the legislation has already passed, and in a representative democracy, I would have thought that would be the other way around, but here we are. So we're staring down the barrel of a centralised government-controlled digital ID system in Australia right now, and I think the gravity of that has yet to be really fully felt.
Yes. And it's also not specific or defined to Australia either. It's a global conversation that's happening at the moment. I know that there's several agendas that are happening at the moment. People are saying that there's the mis and disinformation bills, there's the social media stuff for kids. People are saying, well, of course, we need to regulate content that children are getting access to. We've got physical hard copy IDs at the moment where if you have to disclose your identity, unfortunately you're disclosing your address, other details and information, including your address, perhaps, that you don't want third parties to get access to. I guess the question is, and you've covered it very comprehensively here in your book, which has also got a foreword by Senator Malcolm Roberts as well, who's been a huge advocate in Australia for freedom and also for around this digital identity. I attended some of his rallies that he scheduled in Australia. And so the first question is, you've created the book against it, but what's the case for it?
Yeah, well, it's almost 300-page book making the case against it. And I think the case for it can basically fit on a T-shirt. Right. So there's a lot of research in that book, not just in the digital era, but the pre-digital analog age. The concept of centralised identification systems, however they're implemented, tend to have fairly common bones. There's a common structure to it. And I've found in my research that a lot of the justifications for them use ill-defined language, and they're eclectic. They cover all manner of things. The Australia card, which is one of the case studies I go to in the book, which was, some may remember, from the mid-'80s, the justification for that was everything from cutting down on illegal immigration to tax fraud to all sorts of things. At the moment, we're very much being sold the idea of convenience.
Yes.
Again, these one words, when you pick at the definitions of them, become a bit more clear. In India's case, there's another case study on India's Aadhaar. That's currently the world's largest biometric digital ID that was sold for more efficient welfare distribution. So it's typically some variation of dangling carrots. In our particular case in the country now, the convenience case, I think, falls fairly flat. There are some government videos out at the moment that use the example of registering a tax file number or requesting a tax file number. I don't know how many tax file numbers you've requested in the last week or two. It certainly doesn't impede my day. It's kind of a lifetime thing, but they quote, it could take you as little as 10 minutes when it currently takes 28 days. Well, I mean, they're not very high transaction things, are they? So
No.
I certainly don't find any more convenience in that, given the absolute radical restructure of our society that implementing the system that will shave off a few days on getting a tax file number requires.
Yeah. So I guess the first thing that I get back from people as well is they make the comment of, well, Paul, if you've got nothing to hide, what are you concerned about?
Yeah, well, there's a famous quote from, again, the Australia card campaign, the campaign against the Australia card, that turns that on its head. Nothing to fear, nothing to hide, nothing to fear should be turned on government, and said, well, no legitimate reason to ask, no legitimate reason to know. Why is the burden of proof falling on us? And who defines these terms? In the context of the MAD bill that was thankfully recently defeated.
Yes.
When definitions of terms are so fluid, as they are in an age like now, you're playing with fire, But it comes down to a matter of sovereignty, doesn't it? I mean, how much sovereignty and control do you want over your life? How far into the household do you want the state to walk? And these are the fundamental questions we have to answer, because the infrastructure that digital ID represents is just downstream from those fundamental questions, and we've got the concrete case of the under 16 social media ban coming in, effective at the end of this year, although we're still not sure how that will be imposed. And the same question applies there. Are these decisions for the government, or are these decisions for the parents in the household? So we need to zoom out a little bit on a lot of these questions and ask, what are we actually trying to solve here? And digital ID systems fundamentally are appropriate in scenarios where a culture has decided that how we represent ourselves in the world, our names, our ages, our political beliefs, our desires, our preferences, all of these things that identify us are somehow to be determined as good or bad by a bureaucrat sitting somewhere behind a mahogany desk.
Yes.
If that's how we want our society to go, then this is the system for you. But I just question that that's actually what we've become as a nation.
Well, that's interesting you should raise that. And that's like, how dystopian does that become? People are inferring the integration with, here we are in 2025. Christine Lagarde from the IMF has openly discussed that Europe's rolling out central bank digital currencies in October 2025. They need digital identities in place to be able to build a platform for central bank digital currencies. It's really a question of how unchecked, how dystopian it can actually become. And then there's also the security of data, given historically the governments have had breaches of data previously anyway. So I think that's...
Let's just do more of what didn't work in the first place, yeah.
And multiply it.
Yeah, that's so that's an unanswerable question. The fact is, we don't know how these safety critical systems will be used. We can't know. So in circumstances where you put very powerful pieces of technology in place, particularly in the burgeoning area of AI that has only been rapidly introduced in this generation, we have no cultural grounding around a moral or ethical framework around how we relate to AI. It's now the case with the introduction of these centralized identity systems, particularly going back to your previous system, what's the difference between it all being in one place versus scattered amongst kind of federal and state level bureaucracies?
Yes.
The act of centralizing data introduces significant risks. Just the centralization of the data. You don't even have to add any more. So yes, that is true that various levels of government know various scoped things about us. The DMV or Department of Transport type scenario, they may know a lot about your vehicle and your registration and these sorts of the sort of information and behaviours that relate to driving. And
yes,
but they don't.
How many points I have left?
Yeah, they don't necessarily know your political views or how many children you have, or
and
all these sort of things. Exactly. When you bring all of this together, you radically change the ability to profile someone and the ability to manipulate someone. And then you throw into the mix, as you were saying before, these CBDCs, and we don't know what's coming around the pipe. But if you've got a piece of technology that enables such a nuanced vision of what happens inside the house, then you're really leaving the door open to a level of totalitarianism that we haven't seen before. And I don't just mean by extent, I mean by type. So in the past, there was always some physical Stau or Stalin or Hitler. People eventually die, right? But, we just don't know if in coming generations it's a well-meaning AI that takes the reins of these systems and just decides that, people wearing suits just don't deserve to be around anymore or whatever. We can't know that. So we have to be careful about building such dangerous systems in the first place. And we need to construct a cultural and social safeguards around their use as well. They go hand in hand.
Absolutely. Well, let's circle back to the digital identity, but let's talk, you touched on AI there as well. I mean, Stephen Hawking, I think in 2013, mentioned his concerns about the impact of AI on a humanity level. And then there's everything else that's happening in the pipeline. Jack Dorsey, the former founder of Twitter, famously said, within the next couple of years, and I'm seeing it already now, what's happening in social media, people cannot delineate between what's real world and what is AI. What is AI generated, what's created. People are falling for all sorts of scams. I joked about it and said, the AI needs to have digital identities. Humans need to remain sovereign. Yeah, which is interesting. But do you anything around the AI agenda at all?
Yeah, look, that's no joke. It's actually not a joke. And in fact, there are companies building proof of humanity systems for the purpose of actually identifying what's produced by an AI.
Right.
So I think that's a far better application of these types of technologies, so that we as a species are served by technology and understand the genesis of what's being produced. The provenance of the data. These fancy dancing videos and so forth. These things can be labelled, and we can stock take AI. Humanity, I argue in the book, is exempt from being stock taken.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we seem to be going down a very different path. And it's one of those paths that you don't get really the opportunity to reverse direction once it's gone past the event horizon, so to speak.
Yeah. After we cross the
What a no return.
that's it. And well-meaning people sharing very poor quality AI pictures of whales getting scrubbed of barnacles and rescuing polar bears and that sort of thing, and that's really poor at the moment. They still can't delineate that it is AI. That's the thing.
Yeah, so it's only going to get more difficult from there.
That's it. Yeah.
It also introduces a different fundamental question. I've yet to meet someone who actually has questioned why, as a society, we're so addicted to identification. When you think about it, it permeates just about everything you do.
Yes.
You need to identify yourself to a bureaucrat or, in many contexts...
Or even for access.
Well, very much for access, yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Who we are, which is very exploitable information, is used to determine resource access on a very granular level. So really, when you think about that, who you are is just a proxy to get to answer another question. What we're actually looking for is a degree of trust. The identity is somewhat irrelevant. The name and address and phone number and all of these things, they're things used for other purposes. But we use them, particularly in the centralised sense, so that someone somewhere can say, oh, yeah, that person is trustworthy. You can exchange goods and services and information with them. We don't identify for the fun of it. And I make the case in the book too that really, again, thinking about zooming out, do we really want to persist with this somewhat clumsy mechanism of relating to each other, particularly online? And again, there are technologies available now that radically change that picture. We can almost already completely eliminate identification as redundant and go to a more trust-based or reputation-based model.
Yes.
And that injects skin in the game into all sorts of daily interactions where people are incentivized to actually do well by each other, rather than just having the big stick of the state chasing you. So there's some very big, and as I said at the beginning, fundamentally philosophical questions that I think we need to start asking, because these systems come from foregone conclusions already. And I think it's time to go back to basics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of it as well, the US Department of Defense, and we get accused sometimes in all the conversations between the lines, is about trying to read the truth or find out what's really happening in the media and what they're putting out. The US Department of Defense put a press release out in 2022 declaring net zero access by 2027. And their directives, we're trying to unpack and find out what the intentions are, why is it being driven, why Australia so quickly, all of these things that we're sort of dealing with at the moment, and who's driving it, where is it?
And who's asking for it?
Yes.
I don't know. When I last filled up the car with petrol, it's kind of one of those social interactions, one of many where you just hear people talk, right? And I've not once heard someone at the Bowser say, you know what really wrecks my day, or the most friction in my life comes from the lack of a digital ID. Never heard it. Never heard. I hear a lot about cost of living. I hear a lot of concern about election integrity and immigration and real tangible issues, the kind of economy and culture that our children will inherit. And I cite a survey from Redfield and Wilton Strategies in the book that basically confirms what you experience every day in the street anyway. So I suspect these systems are being pushed from a top-down agenda.
Yes.
Exemplified by the fact that we're talking about defining these systems post passing the legislation.
Yes.
And so it's a very valid question. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Why push a system that, by all evidence, no one's asking for, particularly one that chews into our budget at a time where we have a lot of other things to be spending money on? It does pose a few interesting questions. Where's the return on investment there? I don't know. And because we can't answer that question, I think that's cause enough to pause the deployment of systems that have goodness knows what impacts down the track, and not just for our generation. Some of the properties of digital systems, their timelessness, their speed, their editability, means that our identities will far outlive us. It's the shadow outlasting the object that casts it, and we don't have a cultural grasp on what that means either. Our children will have to live with high resolution documentation of who their parents were. And we see evidence today already without that.
Yes.
How we've integrated into our culture the ability to blame people for the supposed sins of their, part of the past. Well, goodness knows what that'll look like in high resolution in the future. So we really need to zoom out on these things and not assume that the answer is already in place and it's just how to implement it that's the concern.
Yes.
We need to re-ask the questions.
Yeah. It's a very comprehensive book. It's like, how many pages? 220-something pages. What was the catalyst for you? I mean, it's no small feat to create and release a book. What was the catalyst? What's the concern? What's the intention behind it?
So I look at writing this book as an act of national service in a way. During the COVID years, the whole world changed. It was a game of whack-a-mole, right?
Yes.
There were so many things going wrong. Institutions that we thought were in place to safeguard us against the very things we were seeing unravel were not doing so. And everywhere you looked, things were falling apart. And I saw many areas of society being fairly well represented. And, the go-to one is the medical area, where many brave doctors were speaking out and providing alternative points of view. But one underrepresented area I thought was this creep of adopting digital technology to fingerprint the behaviour and activities of everyday people.
Yes.
And the only real talking point on that was the Chinese social credit system. Well, we don't want to be that.
No.
And that's totally valid. But
Yeah.
it's also sufficiently removed from our everyday lived experience that it doesn't really land home emotionally. There's a sense of that'll never happen to me.
Although the social credit system was tested in Northern Territory in 2018. Yeah.
Again, possibly sufficiently removed from everyone's kind of day-to-day
Absolutely.
life that it just doesn't land home. So
Yeah.
I thought, well, I've got obviously a technical background. I've got a very relevant family background, and so I thought I'll do something about it. And I very quickly learned how difficult it is to articulate and how ephemeral these systems are, and that they're struggles that those who see what they're capable of have to deal with. So I actually rewrote the book about halfway through because it wasn't sufficiently elementary enough
Yes.
for average people to read, and that's certainly my objective here. It's not a textbook; it's a human story. I cautiously reveal quite, I suppose in some regards, sensitive components to my family history in an attempt to personalise the experience of living under a situation where someone else decides how you can represent yourself in the world.
Yes. Yes.
So hopefully I've provided a resource that people can now digest in a relatable way.
Yeah. Thank you. And I wanted to ask you as well, because we have Real ID has been launched in the US effective the 7th of May, 2025. People are accusing it of being the interface for full-blown digital identity. We have directors' IDs in Australia, people wanting to get control of their superannuation funds, etc. I know there was a lot of threats that were made around adopting that. I don't think it was probably adopted as rigorously as they had liked it to have been. I guess the thing is moving forward is to create the conversations for the solutions, moving forward for the options, because it's one part of the conversation is people just even being aware that it's happened. I'm sure there's many Australians that weren't aware that it was passed or rammed through Parliament at the end of 2024. The conversations for possibility, surely there must be methods and processes online. People want to be online. They want to be able to transact and do business. They need to be able to verify that they are who they say they are. We don't want certain types of material getting accessed by children. What's the conversation for the options and the solutions?
Yeah, before you talk about any solutions, you need to have a clear idea of what the problem is.
Yes.
So again, it's one of those zoom out things. So what is the problem? To what degree do we want to abdicate sovereignty to the state? Because it's a spectrum, and at the extreme end of the spectrum, you have no control over everything, including how your kids are raised. And I would argue that under 16, a social media ban is an incursion into the family home of a magnitude that we're yet to really become aware of. But ultimately, there's a truism around these sorts of identification systems, or systems that expose identity in an asymmetrical way. So these systems make us transparent to the state, and at the same time they make the state opaque to us. Now that's not, is that what we want? That's the first question we need to ask, is that really what we want? Because if it is what we want, then there's no point talking about solutions. The solutions come downstream from us realizing what our national identity is and determining whether we're on track or off track. And with absolute knowledge of a population's identity comes absolute command of its destiny.
Yes.
And I suppose that's the bumper sticker. We have to digest that one first. And again, the Australia card case study is just puts a spring in my step every time I think of it, because it brings to the fore that classic Australian kind of rebel mentality that the Australia card didn't fall over on any technical flaws, and there were many. It fell over because the culture just had a visceral objection to being branded effectively with a number that's issued by the state. So ultimately, that's the question. If we do decide that we do want more sovereignty and we're going in the wrong direction, and this is not what we want to bequeath our children, then that's a different discussion. And I would say that the solutions come in a pair. I would say there's a technical component to it, and I propose some technical some technologies that are currently available that do all sorts of amazing things in terms of facilitating online trust, that strip identity from the equation. It takes a little while to get your head around it.
Decentralized.
Yep. But again, that has to be married with cultural safeguards and enforcements. That technology can't solve everything. It can't tell us who we want to be. It serves ultimately our end goals and our desires. So these systems can be implemented so long as we have the cultural checks and balances in place and we understand what we're willing to tolerate.
Yes. Yeah. So, and most people I know either first of all, don't have, they're not aware of the issue or the problem, and then B, they're not perhaps aware of the ramifications of the digital aspects. I mean, I've been sort of beating the drum for some time, for a number of years now, around particularly the capabilities of central bank digital currencies, the fact that they have the ability to be tracked, traceable, confiscatable in real time, have an expiration, geofenced, geo-blocked. So I think that's the very real concern, and it seems to be as what other people have described as like the totalitarian tiptoe, where it just sort of happens very gradually. In the proverbial Charles Handy's book, In the Age of Unreason, we're being the frogs that have been slowly sort of cooked in the in the pot.
So I run through what some of the capabilities of our current digital systems are compared to the analog ones of the past. And just to contrast that a little bit, Peter Garrett in the 80s called the Australia card the greatest threat Australia has ever faced, which includes the bombing of Darwin, by the way. And that's with 1980s technology. You know, people used to sit in front of terminals and use like analog phone lines that made your arm sore to hold, you know. What's capable now is just orders of magnitude worse, I would argue, or more risky than what Peter Garrett claimed was our greatest threat we've ever faced. So, the average...
Where's Peter now when we need him?
That's an interesting question. Where are a lot of people? So one of the things I referred earlier to, that spring in the step, one of the things that gives me goosebumps about that time was how it was a unifying issue. And boy, do we need unifying issues in this country now, right? We've been divided every which way across every axis and domain. Now, in the 80s, it was almost a blessing in disguise because, you know, there were blue-collar workers, there were farmers, there were authors, musicians, politicians, doctors, barristers, professionals. It doesn't matter how. It crossed age demographics. It crossed geography. It really rallied the nation. And Bob Hawke at the time came up with the term strange bedfellows to describe that effect. And so that's what I hope for our country now, is that it's a really unifying thing, because it touches at the heart of everyone's lived experience, these systems. And unfortunately, I think it's a matter of when, not if. They'll step on something that you care about. And for each of us, that's different. It could be something as simple as whether you can buy Vegemite or not, or something. It really is that granular. And we got a taste of that in the last half decade, and that's just a taste.
Absolutely. I want people to know from a hope point of view that there are solutions in place, but not enough to think, oh, well, it's going to be sorted, so someone else will be doing something else about it. I don't need to worry about it.
So the good way to frame that is, if we're going to charge the private sector with building usable technology on top of these solutions, then we need to signal to business that there's a market for it.
So let's have a look at the two timelines, Paul. It's what's potential, and we're definitely at a crossroads at this point in time, to have people to be educated and informed, and then also know that there's options that are available as well. First of all, what's the dystopian timeline as far as the potentiality is concerned, if this agenda and narrative is allowed to sort of keep railroading its way through?
Yeah. So without getting too defeatist, I think there's...
Well, let's be realist.
Yeah, that's a good... Okay, that may be one of the same.
Okay.
The nature of these types of systems is they tend to be built slowly to start with, and then they really ramp up. Now, in this country in particular, we have a suite of legislative instruments already in place. In one case, we've mentioned the social media ban, the under-16 ban, that comes into effect this December, so we're a few months away from that. The technology trials have yet to conclude, and so they're going to be rapidly adopted within months by...
But it does seem that a lot of the tech companies have already preemptively implemented them already in relation to verification.
Well, we don't know how that verification yet will be formalised.
Yes.
But the point is, to go back to your timeline, is it may very well be the case that we wake up one day and overnight a switch has been flicked, and petrol doesn't flow from your Bowser anymore because you ate too much meat, or something like that.
Voted for the wrong party.
Something like this, yeah. And sometimes the best way to answer somewhat unknown questions like that is to look at the recent past. And again, the speed at which these check-in apps proliferated throughout with almost zero friction throughout a society, and were adopted by all manner of businesses, cafes and public transport and employers. I think that
they were threatened financially.
Sure, there's always some kind of context behind it.
Yes.
But these things are exploited for whatever ends are being chased, but it can be very rapid. With digital technology, can be rolled out very quickly. Days, weeks, particularly since we've already had quite a period of clandestine architectural building around these things. So it just, I guess it depends on what the particular narratives, that what the foot in the door, and I certainly see access to the internet as being where this will poke its head first.
Yes.
It's starting with age, it's starting with children under the pretenses of looking after kids, but that could very easily translate into all internet usage, possibly even without intent.
Yes.
So that's going to make life quite challenging. And that could happen at the speed of light, quite literally. And I think that depends, the technical rollout will again depend on the social adoption. And I just don't know how round two of what we've seen in the last few years will look like.
Yes.
I think we've matured rather quickly to some degree in this country.
Soberingly.
Soberingly, yeah.
Yes.
And everyone has their own line at which they're willing to take no more. But from a technical point of view, instantly.
Yes. I guess the aspects that I'm primarily concerned about is that it being the stepping stones and the integration for the digital agenda, what people are defining as the digital agenda, smart cities, geofences, geoblocks, we've spoken about it previously. Albanese a couple of years ago did the $5 billion deal with Microsoft for what they call Cyber Shield, which is some people consider to be Orwellian doublespeak. So that goes both ways. That's traffic, no traffic in, no traffic out. And then integration with the AI capabilities as well, so that they're able to remove a lot of the roles, including law enforcement, etc. as well. They consider it to be a highly efficient and effective, cost-effective system of management for people. I guess that's my concern around it as well.
Efficient at what? Efficiency sounds great.
So efficient at surveillance.
Yeah. Efficient. It depends on what your goal is, what the goal is you're targeting. You know, if you've got a nefarious agenda, you necessarily want that to be very inefficient.
Yeah.
But they sound warm and fuzzy, don't they? You know,
they do.
Terms like shield and efficiency and these one-word slogans are to be viewed with extreme caution.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's some other information that's come through recently as well, which is in relation to AI and AI capability. There's AI capability that's integration with drone technology, etc. as well. I was sharing this before as well. This is sort of it's getting hot between India and Pakistan at the moment in the world. There's what's happening there in that regard. Israel's wanting to get access and potentially weaken Pakistan so they can get access to Iran. It says here, Israel is heavily arming India. We're talking drones, smart bomb surveillance systems, not just to fight Pakistan, but to replicate the Gaza model in Kashmir. The same facial recognition tech used to control Palestinians is now being deployed in India-administered Kashmir. Israel is exporting its occupation playbook, and India is buying it wholesale.
Yeah, well, India already has Aadhaar in place, which is, you know, the world's largest biometric digital ID system in a nuclear-armed democracy, by the way.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about how does that work?
Yeah, so it came in 2009 or so, I think, from memory, and as I mentioned, it's a centralised, managed identity system.
Okay,
which requires.
Is that through smart? Everyone has to have a smartphone to conform.
It's typically linked to a phone number, a SIM card. So it's a repurposing of that, and I've run through a couple of interviews I've done with technology colleagues who talk about Aadhaar under the condition of anonymity.
Right.
Even one who lives and works in Australia, so it gives you some idea of what descent costs. So the system tracks everyone's retina scans and fingerprints.
Yes.
And there's all manner of examples where that's gone afoul for people. But you're talking about efficiency. Certainly, it makes some things efficient, and what's something that governments do, particularly at times of conflict. Well, conscription's one of them, isn't it? So it'd make conscription very quick and easy and convenient from those who are, just food for thought.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know, but if you weigh those two examples, the earlier example of applying for a tax file number in 10 minutes or potentially being conscripted instantly, I think they're not particularly equal in consideration. But
So, Paul, let's talk about the utopian timeline. Let's talk about what's possible in relation to solutions. Let's talk about a conversation for the future we want to create, not one that gets dictated to us.
Yeah, look, this is where I get really excited, because there's no point having these discussions if there's nothing we can do about it, right? So I mentioned before technology being a two-sided coin, and that's very much the case here when it comes to these sorts of systems. And it may be hard to believe, but we have the mathematics and the technology. Actually, they're quite well established already to do exactly what these things claim that they will do, but in safe ways.
Yes.
And by safe, I mean doing all sorts of interesting things under the umbrella of what's called self-sovereign identity, or SSI, where the individual actually births the identifier with which they interact with the world, as opposed to having it assigned to them by a state or a business. And with that sort of approach, with putting the individual at the center of an identification scheme, it means you can be very selective about what you disclose to who, and under what circumstances. And there are all sorts of real world examples for that. But I use one in the book, actually, of an example of an amusement park, where everyone's probably seen the situation where you have that kind of measurement stick. You have to be this height or higher or a certain age to go on this ride. And to use that example, that would usually mean that the verifier of that information would actually measure you or compare you, that actually look at your physical traits, part of your identity, your height, and make that determination as you go onto the ride. But the type of thing that sovereign identity allows you to do is you can prove to someone that you're a certain height or a certain age or goodness knows what without revealing the information that was used to determine that. So, you can tell us that someone's over 18 or over 16, as the case is with social media, without revealing the birth date. And so that means it's much safer. And people might get their minds in a bit of a knot understanding how that happens, but it's mathematically well established. And in the amusement park ride case, might be equivalent to challenging someone who's trying to go onto the ride to get a ticket that's located on a certain shelf at a certain height. And if you can demonstrate that you've been able to get that ticket, then you qualify to go on the ride. And there's no need to measure that person, their height. And that's the kind of concept that SSI introduces. Maybe you might apply for a job and the employer's asking for your educational credentials. And, you might want to reveal that you've got a law degree, but not reveal what institution issued that degree or when you earned it. These are other characteristics that we now leak into the world when we expose our diplomas or degrees, but you can be very granular with what you expose, and ultimately the employer largely may only be interested in the fact that you have that qualification and nothing more about it. So this is the type of world that we could have where we absolutely know where our data has been shared, and we can also revoke it when circumstances change, as they invariably do. So in terms of timeline, so that's an open-ended one, because typically these sorts of systems are built by the private industry, and there's competition involved, which is actually a wonderful thing because the consumers end up with the best products that compete with each other.
Hopefully for the best price.
For the best price, all that good stuff. But in order to kick that beautiful machine into action, we need to actually, again, going back to the social and cultural component, signal to businesses that there's an appetite for these type of technologies. We want an alternative to the government giving us a green tick or a red cross at a ride or at an ATM or goodness knows where. We want something where we have custody of what we share and we can revoke it if and when we choose. And business has the private market has a wonderful way of picking up on that zeitgeist, and so we need to signal to these businesses that there's an appetite for developing products around this established technology. And so if we manage to do that fairly rapidly and at scale, I'm fairly confident that the global tech market would be very responsive to that. And we've already got trials in this country, actually from a Melbourne-based business that's doing something similar. There's a trial running in Darwin at the moment, I understand. So there are actually proof of concept type systems in operation now that could potentially roll out again very, very quickly if there's the consumer demand for it. So I'm kind of optimistic there.
Yeah, wonderful. Anything else that you wanted to share with us in closing as well, Paul?
I just can't emphasize enough how fundamentally philosophical this topic is.
Yes.
It sounds like, particularly with cost of living issues and housing issues, it just sounds like, the problem that people without other problems talk about. But it absolutely cuts through everyone's heart, and I implore people to just think of something that you love in life, and then just think of a bureaucrat standing in between you and it. Whatever it is, whether it's your children, your job, your money, your possessions, your favorite color, I don't know. That everyone loves something, and by extension, everyone loves that ability to obtain it and retain it, being within their grasp. It's a fundamental question, and if there's any doubt in people's minds about that, then we need to put the brakes on this now, and we need to start having uncomfortable conversations again, and that's one of the pillars that I advocate for in terms of solutions as well. Our best leverage is to start making people feel uncomfortable when they cross the bounds of what's socially acceptable. And I make the case that asking personal identifying questions, particularly for reasons of bureaucratic efficiency, is akin to commenting on a lady's weight gain. There's some taboo topics that still exist out there in our society, and identification needs to be firmly in the middle of that window. And if we can start making people feel rightly uncomfortable about imposing these questions on it, then the enforceability of these systems become that much harder, and it buys us time to get some of these wonderful alternatives in place.
Yes. So where can people buy your book, Paul?
Yeah, so it's available at my website, paulgconlon.com. We supporting local printers. It's printed on the Gold Coast by a business that was family run. But also it's available on all online retailers as well.
Okay.
The audio version of Chapter 1 I've released for free, so that's available on my website and on socials and that sort of stuff, because I'm certainly not doing this for profit. It's been very costly for me in many regards, not just financially, but I genuinely want to leave the world a freer place than I found it.
Yes.
And that's particularly challenging at the moment. So absolutely go and get it. Head to my website and please determine what is fundamentally important to you and your children.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I acknowledge you for putting this information out and being willing to have the uncomfortable conversation, which is not just, I said, not an Australian issue, but it's also a global issue at this point in time. So I acknowledge you for your contribution and your sacrifice. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. Likewise.
Citizen won the case against digital identity. Paul Conlon, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Paul.
Cheers.
Anytime.
Thanks.
And the smoke clouds up the side.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Between the Lines podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. If you could please follow it and subscribe to any of our YouTube channels, Spotify, social media platforms, etc. And we're also seeking any potential partnership and sponsorship opportunities that might exist. So please contact us if you have any interest in that. You can find us via our website, which is BTL.media. Thank you for joining us until we dig into our next story, Between the Lines.